UN and humanitarian staff on the ground who are targets of attacks, who are killed, arrested and tortured, who are humiliated and harassed. It has also real-life consequences for Palestinians, as Israel has used it as a pretext to block humanitarian aid to be distributed by UNRWA. It is time for all these Israeli actions to trigger a serious international reaction, one that enforces consequences for these crimes rather than just make pleas that Israel continues to dismiss. There is no humanity when our lives are treated as expendable. There are no rules without enforcement. And Israel has been treated as a state above the law for so long that it feels it no longer has to hide when acting as an outlaw state. From ethnic cleansing to genocide. Our agony is caused by Israelis' actions, but also by the impunity it has been afforded, by the fact countries have not taken decisive measures to stop it, and many continue to call it and treat it as an ally even while it is committing such atrocities. Mr. President, we express our appreciation to the E10, all of you, for having put forward this resolution, and we welcome its adoption by the Council. We thank Algeria for representing us and all the Arab countries in this endeavor. We salute Arab unity in demanding immediate ceasefire and prevailed. This must be a turning point. This must lead to saving lives on the ground. This must signal the end of this assault of atrocities against our people. A nation is being murdered. A nation is being dispossessed. A nation is being displaced for decades now, but never at this scale since the Nakba. Never this openly, from Tantura to Gaza, from 1948 to 2024, we have endured. We have survived. We have resurrected, only to face death once again. Life must prevail in Gaza. Must prevail in Gaza. Freedom must prevail in Palestine. For 6 months now, every single Palestinian in Gaza has endured untold suffering, loss, pain, and tragedy. This must stop now. Palestinian hostages, Palestinian victims are not less deserving of compassion and empathy, of outrage and solidarity. They must be freed from fear and want, from siege and occupation, from death and dispossession. Families must be reunited and start to heal, at least from the wounds that can actually be healed. They must be given the chance to bury their loved ones, to mourn their loss, to rebuild what can be. Even if the ceasefire happened now and the siege was lifted now, it would take generations to deal with the trauma and the devastation. Mr. President, now that this Council has finally called for a ceasefire, all forces should coalesce to make sure it is enforced. Apologies to those who the world has failed, to those that could have been saved and were not. Save the lives of those who survived against all odds. Tell them help is on the way. Hold accountable those who inflicted such suffering upon them. End this injustice, end it now. All of this is long overdue. And I thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, at the outset, I want to express my deepest condolences to the Russian people and to the families of all the victims of the heinous terror attack on Friday. Terror must always be condemned in the harshest terms. The Security Council was justifiably very quick to condemn Friday's terror attack in Russia, just as it was waited no time to condemn the terror attack in Iran against a police station back in December. Yet still, to this day, the Council refuses to condemn the most widespread and barbaric massacre suffered by the Jewish people since the Holocaust. At least 137 people were murdered at Crocus City Concert Hall in Russia on Friday by radical jihadists. And yes, almost 6 months ago, nearly 400 people were murdered at the Nova Music Festival in Israel by the radical jihadists of Hamas. Why does the Security Council discriminate between Russians murdered at a concert and Israelis murdered at a music festival? Civilians, dear colleagues, no matter where they live, deserve to enjoy music in safety and security. And the Security Council should have the moral clarity to condemn such acts of terror equally, without discrimination. Sadly, today as well, this Council refused to condemn the October 7th massacre. This is a disgrace. Colleagues, it was the Hamas massacre that started this war. I repeat, it was the Hamas massacre that started this war. Nearly 6 months have passed, and the Security Council still has not condemned the child-murdering rapist that began this war. The resolution just voted upon makes it seem as if the war started by itself. Well, let me set the record straight. Israel did not start this war, nor did Israel want this war. Israel disengaged and withdrew from Gaza 18 years ago. We wanted a ceasefire and coexistence. You can repeat here slogans and purport to know for the Palestinians what the Palestinians seek, but this won't make it the truth or the reality. The Palestinian representative here is lying through his teeth when he says that his people want to live side by side with Israel. By the way, as you probably know, he does not represent Hamas, he does not represent the Gazans. They did not choose him to speak for them. His leader, President Abbas, refuses to even condemn the massacre, and he continued to pay terrorists. After Israel withdrew from Gaza, the Palestinians elected Hamas, a terrorist organization. They elected a terror organization. Hamas converted every inch of Gaza into a terror war machine, right under the UN's nose, maybe with the help of some of the UN's agencies like UNRWA. And Hamas initiated ceaseless attacks on Israeli civilians throughout the past 18 years. thousands and thousands of indiscriminate rockets and missiles at civilians. Today, Hamas is the most popular movement among Palestinians. And according to every poll, the vast majority of Palestinians support Hamas's massacre on October 7th, not only in Gaza, also in Judea and Samaria. This is the reality you should face and you should address. Colleagues, while the resolution fails to condemn Hamas, it does state something that should have been the driving moral force. This resolution denounces the taking of hostages, recalling that it is in violation of international law. Taking innocent civilian hostage is a war crime, and there is no arguing that this is what Hamas has committed. The release of the hostages should have been the #1 priority. When it comes to bringing the hostages home, the Security Council must not settle for words alone, but take action, real action. It is unfathomable that when it comes to releasing the hostages, we still only see inaction. Not a single step has been taken by the Council, aside from symbolic words. Yet, when it comes to the situation in Gaza, the Council rushed to take action. You appointed a special coordinator and established a monitoring mechanism. The Council visited Rafah to see the aid shipments firsthand. And the Secretary General has already visited Rafah crossing twice. Why do our hostages not receive concrete action? What have you done to advance their release? Colleagues, following this Council's adoption of UNSCR 2712 and 2720, which both called for the release of all hostages, Hamas did not stop to even contemplate for even one moment. It should be very clear that as long as Hamas refuses to release the hostages in the diplomatic channels, there is no other way to secure their return other than through a military operation. So on the one hand, the resolution says that taking civilian hostages is in violation of international law, yet, on the other hand, despite the fact that you know Hamas won't listen to your calls and release the hostages, you demand a ceasefire. Take a moment and think about this moral contradiction. Your demand for a ceasefire without conditioning it on the release of the hostages not only is not helpful, but it undermines the efforts to secure their release. It is harmful to these efforts because it gives Hamas terrorists the hope to get a ceasefire without releasing the hostages. All members of the Council, all members should have voted against this shameful resolution. Mr. President, where are these Council's actions? Why don't you designate Hamas as a terror organization? Even if there are Council members here who would prevent this due to their political alliances with Hamas leadership, where are the moral efforts to advance such a designation? I wish to suggest an alternative text that should have been adopted by the Council if it wasn't so biased against Israel. The Security Council strongly condemns and deplores all abuses of human rights and, where applicable, violations of international humanitarian law by the terrorist group, including those involving violence against civilian populations, notably women and children, kidnapping, killing, hostage-taking, pillaging, rape, sexual slavery and other sexual violence, recruitment of children and destruction of civilian property. The Security Council demands that the terrorist group immediately and unequivocally cease all hostilities and all abuses of human rights and violations of international humanitarian law and disarm and demobilize. The Security Council demands the immediate and unconditional release of all those abducted who remain in captivity. The Security Council recognizes that some of such acts may amount to crimes against humanity. Well, colleagues, I did not draft this text. You know who did? This Council. This is the resolution adopted by the Council 10 years ago when Boko Haram kidnapped the schoolgirls in Nigeria. So I ask you again, why can this Council call on Boko Haram to lay down their arms, but the same cannot be demanded of the murderous Hamas terrorists? Is the life of little baby Kfir Bibas worth less than the life of Nigerian child? Sadly, it's for the same reason why you can condemn terror attacks in Russia and Iran, but not in Israel. To this Council, Israeli blood is cheap. This is a travesty, and I'm disgusted. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Israel for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Yemen.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is my honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the Arab Group. At the outset, I would like to congratulate you and congratulate Japan on presiding over the Council for this month. I also thank you for holding this session. We would also like to express our condolences to our colleague Vasily and to the Russian delegation, as well as the Russian government and people, for the terrorist act that claimed the lives of dozens of victims. We condemn this terrorist act and we condemn terrorism in all its forms. The Arab Group would like to thank the E10 for tabling this concise and humanitarian draft resolution that was adopted by the Security Council. This resolution unequivocally and expressly calls for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza during the holy month of Ramadan, leading to a permanent and sustainable ceasefire. Given the urgency of this call from the Arab Group and the international community as a whole, especially in light of the dangerous and catastrophic deterioration of the humanitarian situation in Gaza, which can no longer be accepted or tolerated. The Arab Group would like to express its thanks and appreciation to all the members of the Security Council that engaged in a positive manner in the negotiations on this draft resolution, and we value the position of member states that voted in favor of this urgent humanitarian resolution. We also welcome the adoption of Resolution 2728, which gives priority to the humanitarian dimension in order to save the lives of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, to make sure that the Security Council once again is shouldering its legal and moral responsibilities in maintaining international peace and security, and to end the bloodbath in Gaza. The Arab Group also reaffirms that we should consider this resolution as a first step leading to another binding resolution that stipulates the immediate ceasefire in the Gaza Strip in order to compel Israel to immediately and without any preconditions cease the war it has launched against the Gaza Strip. We also reaffirm that the efforts to reach an agreement on the exchange of prisoners and detainees and the ratification of a truce, this does not run counter to the call for an immediate ceasefire, as this call would contribute to facilitating and enhancing these efforts. Mr. President, this Council has been the hostage of political calculations and narrow interest that disregard the humanitarian and legal right to save lives, stem the bloodshed, and deliver urgent assistance to those in need without any obstacles. This lies at the heart of the responsibilities and functions of this Council. Adopting today's resolution comes as a response, albeit late, to the Palestinian victims and the calls of the international community for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. We do hope that you will continue to work seriously and not just focus on a temporary ceasefire, but to work on reaching a comprehensive and final ceasefire to allow the delivery of all humanitarian assistance to Gaza without obstacles, to put an end to the crime of forceful displacement of Palestinians that seeks to uproot them from their lands. This resolution reaffirms that the Israeli occupation forces do not have free rein in perpetrating daily massacres against children and women, in preventing the delivery of humanitarian assistance, and in forcibly displacing Palestinians. The Arab group calls for an immediate compliance with today's resolution, and we warn against the consequences of moving forward with the occupation's plans to launch a ground offensive against the city of Rafah, which is the last safe haven for over 1.5 million Palestinian displaced persons. This will cause an unacceptable humanitarian catastrophe. Furthermore, the Arab group renews its position that rejects the policy of bias, cover-up, and protection for the plans of the Israeli occupation authorities at the expense of over 32,000 people who died and over 72,000 people who were injured, mostly women and children, in the Gaza Strip over the past 5 months of this brutal Israeli aggression. The Arab group categorically rejects the double standards that is prolonging this conflict in light of the complete failure to implement any resolutions on Palestine over the past 75 years. We also call once again for the complete implementation of all relevant Security Council resolutions, including resolutions 2712 and 2720 of 2023. Mr. President, the Israeli occupation forces continue with their crimes and their aggression and genocidal war against civilians in the Gaza Strip since the 7th of October. They're targeting women and children. They've even added fuel to the fire by adopting the policy of starvation against the Palestinian people to add to Israel's crimes against humanity and its blatant violations. Therefore, the Arab group calls on this Council to hold Israel accountable for its crimes and to impose strict sanctions on settlers in the occupied Palestinian territory, including in Jerusalem, those who are perpetrating acts of violence against the Palestinian people or those who are inciting violence. The Israeli occupation should also bear the consequences of this brutal aggression and the brutal massacres against the residents of Gaza. They should bear the responsibility of rebuilding what their monstrous military machine has destroyed. They should pay reparations to all victims that died as a result of this aggression. In conclusion, Mr. President, the Arab group reaffirms that it will continue with its efforts at all levels and in all fora to make sure that this Council shoulders its responsibility to make sure that the provisions of this resolution are implemented, provisions on an immediate ceasefire, on the delivery of humanitarian assistance without obstacles, to put an end to the policy of forcible displacement of the Palestinian people, and to provide international protection to Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territory, and to hold Israel, the occupying power, accountable for all its crimes against the Palestinian people. The Arab group also calls on all countries and international organizations to recognize without delay an independent Palestinian state along the lines of June 4, 1967. with East Jerusalem as its capital, and to accept Palestine as a full member state of the United Nations and its entities in order to end the suffering of this people and to restore some of their inalienable rights that they have been denied over the past decades, so that Palestinians can live in their independent states that is recognized internationally, that is a full member of the United Nations, similar to other countries around the world. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Yemen for their statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of the speakers. The meeting is adjourned.